It was long thought that most healthy human brains have the same structure and function, but scientific and technological advancements suggest this is not quite the case. Even a simple discussion between two or more people can reveal the flaws in the assumption. Consider one of the most basic internal experiences everyone has: thinking. Most people go about their lives assuming everyone else thinks as they do. I don't mean the content of their thoughts, I'm talking about the form their thoughts take. Language, specifically, has long been associated with thinking and is even credited with our advanced intelligence, which sets us apart from the rest of the animal kingdom. However, research now suggests language isn't required for thinking at all. Throughout history, many writers and philosophers observed a strong relationship between language and thought. A few examples include Oscar Wilde's statement that language is the parent and not the child of thought, or when Ludwig Wittgenstein claimed that the limits of my language mean the limits of my world, and Bertrand Russell said that the role of language is to make possible thoughts which could not exist without it. Scholars, too, are curious about the link between thought and language and wonder whether language is somehow a prerequisite for thinking. Yet one glance at nature suggests there's a flaw in our curiosity. After all, countless other animals on Earth think and achieve thought-related actions without words. Many species are even capable of complex problem-solving and demonstrate high levels of cognition, such as chimps that can beat humans in a strategy game and New Caledonian crows that make tools for capturing prey, all without language like ours. Still, human cognition is undeniably sophisticated and surpasses the rest of Earth's animal kingdom in many ways. Similarly, human language seems to transcend other animal communication methods, as far as we know. Given this, it seems reasonable that our complex thinking might require language to achieve our species-specific talents, such as solving differential equations or designing and constructing massive structures. But what about the more physical aspects of language? As Gary Stix of Scientific American asks Evelina Fedorenko, a neuroscientist who studies language at the McGovern Institute for Brain Research at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, in an interview, do we require words or syntax as scaffolding to construct the things we think about? Or do the brain's cognitive regions devise fully baked thoughts that we then convey using words as a medium of communication? Fedorenko has spent her career trying to answer these questions, and now she can, but let's start from the beginning of her story. Fedorenko told Stix that her curious adventure began in the early 2000s as an undergraduate at Harvard University. At the time, the hypothesis that thought requires language was a popular topic in academia and aligned well with the philosophy she'd learned during her previous training in a tradition of linguist Noam Chomsky, which teaches that we use language to think and that thinking is why our species evolved language. Fedorenko was curious about the seemingly cohesive relationship between language and thought and wanted to investigate further. She shared with Stix, "I had a very strong intuition that language is pretty critical to complex thought. In the early 2000s, I really was drawn to the hypothesis that maybe humans have some special machinery that is especially well suited for computing hierarchical structures. And language," she observed, "is a prime example of a hierarchical structure because letters form words, which combine into sentences and so on. So she thought, well, I'm going to go and find this brain region that processes hierarchical structures of language." Fedorenko said she'd heard claims that parts of the left frontal cortex, which is involved in language, but also a wide array of other cognitive functions, from logical thinking, problem solving and planning to creativity, motivation, emotional control, and regulating our impulsive behaviors, might be involved in hierarchical thinking. But she didn't find evidence of it there or anywhere else. She told Stix, "I searched for evidence for such a brain region, and it doesn't exist. You find this very clear separation between brain regions that compute hierarchical structures in language and brain regions that help you do the same kind of thing in math or music. In other words, one specific brain region doesn't appear to be dedicated to hierarchical thinking. Instead, there seem to be many subject-dependent systems capable of it." She recently co-authored an article published in Nature summarizing 15 years worth of her research since then, and it makes clear that the philosophy she learned and the assumptions academics made when she started her curious adventure are wrong. Language and thought are not codependent but separate systems in the brain. In her interview with Stix, Fedorenko discusses two methods that offer convincing evidence that might explain why thought and language are separate systems in the brain. One example Fedorenko cites is a very old method that scientists have used for hundreds of years, examining deficits in different abilities among people with brain damage, such as, say, people with damage to the brain regions related to language, a condition known as aphasia, which has been studied for centuries. Aphasia impairs a person's ability to express and understand language, including reading and writing, and may co-occur with speech disorders. The condition typically emerges suddenly, often after a stroke or head injury, but it can also evolve slowly as the result of a brain tumor or a progressive neurological disease. Aphasia, especially in extreme cases known as global aphasia, when people can completely lose their ability to produce and understand language, offers scientists the most information about how language relates to brain systems involving thought. As Fedorenko explained, you can ask whether people who have these severe language impairments can perform tasks that require thinking. You can ask them to solve some math problems or to perform a social reasoning test, and all of the instructions, of course, have to be nonverbal because they can't understand linguistic information anymore. Thankfully, scientists have plenty of experience working with populations without verbal language, such as human infants and non-human animal species, and have methods for conveying instructions non-verbally. Research so far shows there are people with severe language impairments who can nonetheless perform all other cognitive tasks they've been tested on so far, from solving math problems and logic puzzles to reasoning about what another person may think or believe about the physical world. Also, during my research for this article, I found and was stunned by a recent study published in March 2024 by researchers at Indiana University, Bloomington, Indiana. The study involved 26 participants between 18 and 85 years old with chronic aphasia, and discovered that 78% of them reported experiencing inner speech, also known as an inner monologue, meaning they think using words, especially when remembering, planning, and motivating themselves. Even more incredible, the severity of their aphasia didn't appear to be a factor in whether the participants experienced inner speech. Then again, perhaps it's less surprising people with aphasia can still think using language, since people with aphantasia, the inability to visualize in one's mind, usually have no issue dreaming in images. Anyway, research studying cognition in people with aphasia provides plenty of evidence suggesting that thinking and language are separate systems in the brain. As the National Aphasia Association states in their FAQ, a person with aphasia may have difficulty retrieving words and names, but the person's intelligence is basically intact. Aphasia is not like Alzheimer's disease. For people with aphasia, it is the ability to access ideas and thoughts through language, not the ideas and thoughts themselves, that is disrupted, the second approach. The second method Fedorenko discussed with Stix involves brain imaging, which has been around since the 1980s and 90s. Technology like fMRI scanning allows scientists to measure blood flow changes in a person's brain as they engage in various tasks or answer questions. The results reveal whether brain regions are distinct or overlap. However, Fedorenko acknowledged to Stix that before she could ask whether language and thought overlap in the brain, I needed a way to robustly and reliably identify language areas in individual brains, so I spent the first bunch of years of my career developing tools to do this. Once scientists could identify brain regions dedicated to language and confirm that damage to these regions in adulthood leads to conditions like aphasia, they could investigate whether the brain's language areas become active when people think during various tasks. So you can come into the lab and I can put you in the scanner, find your language regions by asking you to perform a short task that takes a few minutes, and then I can ask you to do some logic puzzles or Sudoku or some complex working memory tasks or planning and decision-making. And then I can ask whether the regions that we know process language are working when you're engaging in these other kinds of tasks. There are now dozens of studies that we've done looking at all sorts of non-linguistic inputs and tasks, including many thinking tasks. We find time and again that the language regions are basically silent when people engage in these thinking activities. Based on her and other experts' research, it appears clear that language and thought are indeed different entities that the brain processes separately, and that social reasoning or problem solving does not require assistance from language or words at all. So if language isn't needed to think, why did we evolve it? Fedorenko points to another common observation that spurred our species to form language: passing along knowledge. Before written language, knowledge was passed down through generations via spoken language, often as stories that became myths and legends, but also in sonnets, such as the Vedas. As Fedorenko told Styx, "What I'm doing right now is sharing some knowledge that I have that you may have only had a partial version of, and once I transmit it to you through language, you can update your knowledge and have that in your mind as well." So it's basically like a shortcut for telepathy. We can't read each other's mind, but we can use this tool called language, which is a flexible way to communicate our inner states to transmit information to each other. Think of all the things you've learned throughout your life and how many of them you learned through language, whether written or spoken, compared to direct, real-world experience. Heck, we're using language right now to transmit knowledge from me to you. Two strangers on the internet. Many aspects of human life and culture revolve around language. It's easy to imagine the plethora of evolutionary advantages language provides our species. Beyond transmitting knowledge, language elevates our relationships by allowing us to share our thoughts, emotions, feelings, ideas, dreams, fears, wants, needs, hopes, and more with each other in detail. Similarly, language helps facilitate cooperative activities, especially as populations grow. Considering the research discussed today showcasing that thought and language are separate systems in the brain, and the importance and versatility language possesses for our relationships and survival as a species, it seems unlikely that complex thoughts evolved after language or that language is required for thinking. So, what about the other assumption about language, that it's what makes our species special within the animal kingdom? Like so many things, the answer is not a straight yes or no. According to Fedorenko, many areas of the cortical sheet, the brain's outer layer, expanded in humans throughout evolution. This brain region is responsible for many functions, including language. It also allows us to reason about what others think, problem solve, and integrate information across multiple brain regions, like linking a series of events together. Considering this, she explained in the interview, "It's most likely that what makes us human is not one golden ticket, as some call it. It's not one thing that happened. It's more likely that a whole bunch of systems got more sophisticated, taking up larger chunks of cortex and allowing for more complex thoughts and behaviors." Learning that thought and language are separate in the brain is a remarkable discovery, inching us forward in our quest to understand the brain and its many mysteries. However, even though my thoughts are a vibrant and multi-layered inner monologue, it seems unsurprising that thinking requires language. One reason is that, as we discussed before, some people don't experience inner speech at all. I also don't see how language could evolve without thought. While I agree that language serves many vital purposes for our species, I think we evolved it primarily to communicate with each other more efficiently, and that using it to pass along or share knowledge through generations came later. This is mainly because some convincing evidence from previous research suggests that females evolved language to aid with childcare and giving birth rather than inventing language out of boredom or to assist in hunting. Still, regardless of why, when, or who evolved language first in our species, it's become one of our greatest tools, and it's challenging to imagine what life would be like today without it.